the 6th century before Christ, a young man named Daniel stood at the edge of a vision that would shake empires and terrify kings across the ancient world. The night sky above Babylon burned with stars like distant fires, each one a witness to the mystery about to unfold in the chambers of his mind. What he was about to see would not be a gentle dream of hope, but a nightmare of beasts rising from churning waters, hungry for dominion over all the earth. This was not just a vision of distant kingdoms, but a window into the very heart of human power, ambition, and the darkness that dwells within it. Daniel had served in the courts of Babylon for decades, watching empires rise and fall like waves crashing against the shore, each one claiming to be eternal. He had seen the golden head of Nebuchadnezzar's statue in his youth, a prophecy of kingdoms that would rule the world in succession, one after another, relentless. But now, in his old age, God was about to show him something far more terrifying than golden statues and silver arms gleaming in the sunlight. He was about to see these empires as God sees them, not as monuments of glory, but as savage beasts tearing at the flesh of humanity with iron teeth. The vision came to him in the night, sudden and overwhelming, like a storm breaking over the mountains with thunder that shakes the very foundations of the earth. He saw the great sea churned by the four winds of heaven, its waters thrashing and foaming like a living thing in agony, desperate to give birth. From those dark, roiling waters, something began to emerge, something that should never have existed in the natural order of creation or in the mind of man. The first beast rose from the depths like a lion, its body massive and golden, its wings spread wide like those of an eagle soaring above all other creatures. It roared with a voice that shook the heavens, claiming dominion over the earth, its eyes blazing with pride and hunger for conquest and endless power. This was Babylon itself, the empire that had carried Daniel away from his homeland as a boy, the kingdom that had destroyed Jerusalem and scattered his people like dust. But even as he watched, the wings were torn from the beast's back, ripped away as if by invisible hands, and it was made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human heart was given to it, and suddenly the great lion seemed small, vulnerable, stripped of its divine pretensions and forced to face its own mortality and weakness. Then came the second beast, crawling from the sea like a bear raised up on one side, 3 ribs clutched between its teeth, dripping with the blood of nations. It was lopsided, unbalanced, a creature of brute force and insatiable appetite, devouring everything in its path without mercy or restraint, or any sense of satisfaction. A voice commanded it to arise and devour much flesh, and it obeyed, crushing kingdoms beneath its massive paws, leaving only ruins and weeping in its wake. This was the empire of the Medes and Persians, Daniel understood. A kingdom that would swallow Babylon whole and rule with an iron fist over the known world. But the third beast was stranger still. A leopard with 4 wings on its back and 4 heads turning in every direction, watching, calculating, planning its next move. It moved with terrifying speed across the face of the earth, conquering nations before they could even raise their swords in defense or cry out for help. This was the swiftness of Alexander the Great, the Greek conqueror who would sweep across the world like wildfire, unstoppable, burning everything in his path to ash. And when he died young, his empire would be divided among his 4 generals, each head of the leopard claiming a portion of his vast and blood-stained kingdom. Have you ever wondered why empires rise and fall? Why human power always seems to devour itself in the end, leaving only ruins and broken promises behind? Daniel watched these beasts with growing horror, understanding that each one represented not just political power, but the spiritual darkness that drives men to conquer and destroy. But then came the 4th beast, and at the sight of it, Daniel's blood ran cold, his heart hammering against his ribs like a prisoner beating against iron bars. This creature was different from all the others, terrifying and dreadfully strong, with teeth of iron and claws of bronze that could tear through anything in creation. It devoured and crushed and trampled everything beneath its feet, leaving nothing but devastation. Its appetite for destruction seemingly without end or satisfaction or mercy. It had 10 horns rising from its head like crowns of bone, each one representing a king or kingdom that would emerge from its terrible and unstoppable reign. This was Rome, Daniel would come to understand. The empire that would crucify the Messiah and scatter the people of God across the earth like seeds in a storm. But as Daniel stared at this monstrosity, something even more disturbing began to happen before his eyes. Something that made his spirit tremble within him with dread. A little horn began to grow among the 10. Small at first, insignificant, easily overlooked, but growing larger and more powerful with each passing moment of the vision. This little horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, cunning and calculating, and a mouth that spoke great and boastful things against the Most High God himself. It plucked out 3 of the other horns by their roots, casting them aside like worthless weeds, consolidating power, demanding absolute loyalty and worship from all who lived. This horn spoke words against God, wore out the saints of the Most High, and thought to change times and laws, to remake reality itself according to its own twisted will. What would you do if you lived under such a ruler? If your faith was tested by a power that demanded you bow down or face death and suffering? Daniel watched as this little horn made war against the holy people and prevailed over them, crushing their resistance, silencing their prayers, destroying their hope and faith. The vision was so terrible that Daniel felt his strength drain away, his body trembling, his mind reeling under the weight of what he was being shown by heaven. But then, just when the darkness seemed absolute and the beasts seemed invincible, the scene suddenly shifted, and Daniel saw something that took his breath away completely. Thrones were set in place in the heavens, and the Ancient of Days took his seat upon a throne of blazing fire, his clothing white as snow, whiter than any earthly light. His hair was like pure wool, and his throne was flames of fire. Its wheels were burning fire, and a river of fire flowed out from before him in an endless stream. Thousands upon thousands attended him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. A host of angels and saints beyond number, beyond human comprehension or counting. The court was seated and the books were opened. The record of every deed, every thought, every word spoken in secret or in the light of day, all laid bare. This was not just a vision of judgment, but a vision of justice, of accounts being settled, of wrongs being made right by the only one with the authority to do so. Daniel watched as the little horn continued to speak its boastful words, even as the court assembled, even as the Ancient of Days opened the books of judgment and truth. And then, in a moment that seemed to stop time itself, the fourth beast was slain, its body destroyed and given over to the burning flame, consumed utterly and completely. The other beasts had their dominion taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time, their power broken, but their existence not yet ended forever. But the fourth beast, the terrible empire with the little horn that spoke against God, was utterly destroyed, erased from existence, cast into the fire of divine judgment. And then Daniel saw something that filled his heart with a hope so powerful, it nearly overwhelmed him. A vision that would sustain the faithful through every dark age. One like a son of man came with the clouds of heaven, approaching the Ancient of Days, and he was led into his presence with honor and glory and majesty. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power, and all nations and peoples of every language worshipped him, bowing before him in reverence and awe and love. His dominion was an everlasting dominion that would not pass away, and his kingdom was one that would never be destroyed, never fall, never fade into dust and memory. This was the promise, Daniel understood, that after all the beasts had risen and fallen, after all the empires had devoured and been devoured, the Son of Man would reign. Not just a kingdom of power, but a kingdom of righteousness, where the saints of the Most High would receive the kingdom and possess it forever and ever and ever. Daniel approached one of those standing there in the vision and asked him the true meaning of all this, the interpretation of the beasts and the horns and the judgment. The angel told him that the four great beasts were four kingdoms that would rise from the earth, each one claiming to be eternal, each one destined to fall. But the saints of the Most High would receive the kingdom and possess it forever, for all ages to come. A promise sealed in the courts of heaven itself. Daniel wanted to know more about the fourth beast, the one different from all the others, the one with iron teeth and bronze claws that devoured everything in sight. He wanted to understand the 10 horns, and especially the little horn that grew up among them, the one with eyes and a mouth that spoke such terrible and blasphemous things. The angel explained that the fourth beast would be a fourth kingdom on earth, different from all the others, devouring the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns were 10 kings who would come from this kingdom, and after them another king would arise, different from the earlier ones, subduing 3 of them completely. This king would speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people, attempting to change the set times and the laws that God himself had established from eternity. The holy people would be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time, a period of suffering that would seem endless, but was measured and limited by God. But then the court would sit in judgment, and his power would be taken away and completely destroyed forever, his arrogance silenced, his reign ended, his name forgotten in shame. Can you imagine the comfort this vision brought to those who would suffer under the heel of tyrants, knowing that every empire has an expiration date written in heaven? The sovereignty, power, and greatness of all kingdoms under heaven would be handed over to the holy people of the Most High, a reversal of all earthly power and glory. His kingdom would be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers would worship and obey him, the Son of Man who came on the clouds with authority from the Ancient of Days. This was the end of the vision, and Daniel was deeply troubled by what he had seen, his face turning pale, his heart heavy with the knowledge of suffering to come. He kept the matter to himself, pondering it in his heart, knowing that this vision was not just for his generation, but for all generations who would face the beasts of empire. For centuries, the people of God would look back at Daniel's vision and find in it a roadmap of history, a prophecy unfolding exactly as it had been shown to him. They would see Babylon fall to Persia, Persia fall to Greece, Greece fall to Rome, each beast rising and falling just as Daniel had seen in the night vision by the sea. And they would wait for the little horn, the final ruler who would speak against God and oppress the saints, the one whose coming would signal the end of all empires. Some would see him in the Roman emperors who demanded worship, in the tyrants who burned believers alive, in every ruler who claimed to be God on earth and demanded absolute loyalty. Others would see him still to come, the final Antichrist who would arise in the last days, making war on the saints before being destroyed by the breath of Christ himself. But the promise remained the same across all generations, the promise that sustained Daniel and would sustain countless others through fire and sword and persecution and death. The beasts would rage, the empires would rise and fall, the little horn would speak its blasphemies, but the Son of Man would come on the clouds with power and glory. The Ancient of Days would open the books, the court would sit in judgment, and the kingdom would be given to the saints of the Most High forever and ever and ever. This was not just a vision of the future, but a vision of reality itself, of the truth that lies beneath all the noise and chaos and violence of human history. Every empire that rises in pride will fall in shame. Every beast that devours will itself be devoured. Every horn that speaks against God will be silenced in the end. And the people who remain faithful, who refuse to bow to the beasts, who keep their trust in the Ancient of Days, will inherit a kingdom that cannot be shaken or destroyed. What if the empires we see today are just the latest versions of the same beasts, driven by the same hunger for power, the same pride, the same darkness? What if we are called, like Daniel, to remain faithful in the midst of empires, to serve with integrity, to refuse to bow, to wait for the Son of Man to come? Daniel's vision was not given to satisfy curiosity about the future, but to strengthen faith in the present, to remind us that God is sovereign over all earthly power and authority. The beasts may roar, the horns may speak, the sea may churn with violence and chaos, but the throne of the Ancient of Days stands firm and unshakable above it all. But when the final empire falls, when the last beast is slain, when the little horn is silenced forever, the kingdom will be given to the saints of the Most High. Not a kingdom built on conquest and violence, not a kingdom maintained by fear and oppression, but a kingdom of righteousness and peace that will never end or fade. This is the hope that sustained Daniel in his old age, that sustained the martyrs in the Roman arenas, that sustains believers today in every land where the beasts still rage. The vision of the four beasts is not just ancient history or distant prophecy, but a lens through which we can see the present moment with clarity and courage and faith. Every generation faces its own beasts, its own little horns, its own choice between bowing to earthly power or standing firm in faith before the throne of the Ancient of Days. And every generation is called to remember that the empires are temporary, the beasts are mortal, the horns will be plucked out, and the kingdom belongs to the saints forever. Daniel lived to see Babylon fall, just as he had seen in his earlier visions. The golden head toppled, the first beast stripped of its wings and made to stand like a man. He lived to see the Medes and Persians rise, the bear with the ribs in its mouth, devouring and crushing, fulfilling the vision exactly as it had been shown to him. But he died before seeing the leopard, or the terrible fourth beast, trusting that God's word would prove true in every detail, in every generation, until the very end of time. His vision has been passed down through the centuries, a lamp shining in a dark place, a reminder that no matter how powerful the beasts seem, they are already defeated in heaven. The court has already assembled, the books are already open, the judgment is already written, and the Son of Man is already coming on the clouds to claim his eternal kingdom. So we wait, like Daniel waited, not in fear but in hope, not in despair but in faith, not in submission to the beasts, but in loyalty to the Ancient of Days. We watch the empires rise and fall. We see the horns speak their boastful words. We feel the weight of living in the age of the beasts, but we do not lose heart. Because we know how the story ends, we know who sits on the throne. We know whose kingdom will stand when all others have crumbled into dust and been forgotten forever. And we know that the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever, for all ages to come, a promise as certain as the throne of God himself.